Tonight, the boundaries between present and past dissolve like morning mist over the English countryside. Feel the air heavy with wood smoke and the scent of fresh rushes, where echoes of Norman French still resonate through stone corridors built to last forever. If this journey touches your soul, join us again and whisper from where you listen to us. Now, dim the lights, breathe deeply. Let us dream with memories that are not ours. I awaken before the first bell of prime rings from the castle chapel, when the world still belongs to the gray half-light that precedes dawn, and the whispered prayers of those who serve God and Lord with equal devotion. My name is Aldrich, and I am a household knight in service to Sir Geoffrey de Montfort, whose stone castle rises from the Yorkshire moors like a testament to Norman power and permanence. The great hall stretches around me in the pre-dawn darkness, its massive timber roof beams disappearing into shadows that seem to hold the very essence of feudal authority. The rushes beneath my feet, scattered fresh yesterday evening by the castle's servants, release their herbal fragrance with each step. Sweet meadow grass mixed with lavender and mint that the lady of the castle insists upon to mask the less pleasant odors that accumulate in any dwelling housing hundreds of souls. These simple floor coverings represent more than mere comfort. They speak to the careful management required to maintain a household that serves as both fortress and home, administrative center and symbol of Norman dominance over the conquered English countryside. The great fireplace that dominates the hall's center still glows with the embers of last night's fire, its warmth a precious commodity in these stone walls that seem to absorb cold from the very earth and hold it like a miser hoards silver. The fire never dies completely. Tending it through the night is one of the many duties that keep the castle's servants busy even during the hours when their betters sleep. The wood smoke that rises toward the louvered opening in the roof carries with it the prayers and hopes of all who dwell within these walls. Around me, other members of the household begin to stir from their sleeping places scattered throughout the hall. The social hierarchy of castle life reveals itself even in these arrangements. Knights like myself sleep on pallets near the Lord's private chambers, while sergeants and men-at-arms occupy spaces closer to the main entrance, ready to respond to any threat that might emerge from the darkness beyond our walls. The servants sleep wherever they can find space, often sharing straw mattresses in the kitchens or storerooms, where their duties will begin before dawn breaks. The stone walls that surround us bear witness to the transformation that has swept across England since Duke William's victory at Hastings nearly a century ago. These massive blocks, quarried from local limestone and fitted together with the precision that marks Norman craftsmanship, replace the wooden halls of Saxon thanes with structures built to endure for generations. Every stone speaks of permanence, of a new order imposed upon this land with the authority of conquest and the blessing of God. The tapestries that hang from iron hooks driven into the stone walls serve both practical and symbolic purposes. Their rich colors, deep blues and crimsons, gold thread that catches firelight like captured sunbeams, provide insulation against the cold that seeps through even the thickest masonry. But they also display the wealth and taste of our Lord, their scenes of hunting and warfare, biblical stories and courtly romance, marking this as the dwelling of a man who has prospered under the new Norman dispensation. The chapel bell begins its call to prime, the first of the canonical hours that structure our days as surely as the stone walls structure our lives. The sound echoes through corridors and chambers, summoning all who dwell within the castle to acknowledge their dependence upon divine grace and their obligations to the feudal order that God has ordained. The bell's bronze voice, cast in the workshops of Rouen and blessed by Archbishop Lanfranc himself, carries the authority of both earthly and heavenly power. I rise from my pallet and begin the morning ritual of dressing that marks my station as a knight in service to a Norman lord. The linen shirt that touches my skin is finer than anything a Saxon peasant might own, while the woolen tunic that covers it bears the colors and device of the de Montfort family, a red lion rampant on a field of gold that proclaims our allegiance to one of the great families that followed the conqueror across the narrow sea. My leather belt, studded with bronze fittings, supports the sword that marks my status as a member of the warrior class that rules this conquered land. The morning air carries sounds that speak to the complex life of a great household awakening to another day of feudal duty. From the kitchens comes the clatter of iron pots and the voices of cooks beginning preparations for the day's meals. The stables echo with the sounds of horses being fed and groomed, while the armory rings with the scrape of whetstones against steel as weapons are maintained in readiness for whatever service our Lord might require. The servants who tend the great hall move with the quiet efficiency of those who understand that their livelihoods depend upon anticipating the needs of their betters. They rebuild the fire with seasoned oak that will burn clean and bright, sweep away the debris of yesterday's activities, and prepare the high table where Sir Geoffrey will break his fast with the ceremony that befits his station. These men and women, drawn from the English population that surrounds our castle, have learned to serve Norman masters with the same dedication their ancestors once gave to Saxon lords. The light filtering through the narrow windows, mere slits in the stone walls designed more for defense than illumination, gradually strengthens as dawn approaches. These openings, barely wide enough for an archer to loose his arrows, remind us constantly that we live in a fortress as much as a home, that the beauty and comfort we enjoy exist within walls built to withstand siege and assault. The glass that fills some of these windows, precious beyond measure and imported at great expense from the workshops of France, transforms ordinary sunlight into jeweled patterns that dance across the stone floors. As the household prepares for another day in service to feudal duty and divine will, I feel the weight of the responsibilities that come with my privileged position. I am both protector and protected, servant and master, bound by oaths of loyalty that extend upward to my lord and downward to those who depend upon my sword for their safety and prosperity. The private chambers of Sir Geoffrey de Montfort occupy the upper floors of the great tower, their stone walls softened by tapestries and hangings that speak of wealth accumulated through faithful service to the crown and shrewd management of his Yorkshire estates. As the Lord's body servant, I am privileged to witness the morning rituals that transform a sleeping man into the embodiment of Norman authority, each gesture and garment carefully chosen to display the power and dignity that feudal society demands of its rulers. The solar, Sir Geoffrey's private chamber, represents the pinnacle of domestic luxury available to a Norman lord of moderate means. The bed, raised on a wooden platform and surrounded by curtains of fine linen dyed with costly indigo, provides both warmth and privacy in a world where solitude is a rare and precious commodity. The mattress, stuffed with goose down rather than the straw that serves lesser members of the household, rests upon a framework of rope and wood that can be dismantled and transported when the Lord travels between his various properties. Lady Matilda, Sir Geoffrey's wife, and the daughter of a minor baron from Normandy, maintains her own chambers adjacent to her husband's solar. Her morning routine requires the services of 2 waiting women who attend to the complex process of dressing a Norman lady according to the fashions that have crossed the Channel from the courts of France. The elaborate arrangements of veils and wimples that frame her face, the carefully pleated gowns that conceal her form while hinting at the wealth that adorns it, all serve to display her husband's prosperity and her own noble breeding. The process of dressing Sir Geoffrey begins with the selection of linen undergarments that mark his status as a man who can afford such luxuries. The shirt, woven from flax grown on his own estates and bleached to snowy whiteness by his household servants, fits closely to his body and extends to mid-thigh. Over this goes a tunic of fine wool, dyed the deep blue that proclaims his allegiance to the royal house, and decorated with embroidery worked by the skilled needlewomen of his household. The ceremony of arming a knight, even for the peaceful duties of daily administration, follows rituals that connect earthly service to divine purpose. The sword belt, blessed by the castle chaplain and bearing the device of the de Montfort family, encircles Sir Geoffrey's waist with the authority of both temporal and spiritual power. The sword itself, forged by master smiths in the workshops of Rouen and blessed with holy water from Canterbury Cathedral, represents not merely a weapon, but a symbol of the knight's oath to defend the church and protect the innocent. The morning ablutions that precede dressing require careful attention to the proprieties that distinguish noble from common behavior. Water, heated in the kitchens and carried to the solar in bronze ewers, fills a basin of hammered silver that reflects the Lord's face as he performs the ritual cleansing that prepares him for the day's duties. The soap, made from olive oil and ash according to recipes brought from the Mediterranean lands, cleanses both body and spirit in preparation for the sacred responsibilities of lordship. The selection of jewelry and ornaments that complete Sir Geoffrey's morning attire serves purposes beyond mere decoration. The gold ring that bears his family's seal transforms his hand into an instrument of legal authority, capable of authenticating documents and binding agreements that will affect the lives of hundreds of his dependents. The silver brooch that fastens his cloak displays craftsmanship that speaks to his connections with the finest artisans of Europe, while the amber beads that hang from his belt carry protective properties that medieval belief invests with genuine power. The morning prayers that conclude the dressing ritual connect the Lord's earthly authority to its divine source. Kneeling before a small altar that occupies one corner of the solar, Sir Geoffrey recites the Latin phrases that acknowledge his dependence upon God's grace and his obligations to rule justly over those placed under his authority. The ivory crucifix that hangs above the altar, carved by monks in the workshops of Saint Denis and blessed by the Archbishop of York, serves as a constant reminder that temporal power exists only through divine sufferance. The breakfast that awaits Sir Geoffrey in his private chambers reflects both the abundance of his estates and the sophisticated tastes that Norman culture has brought to England. White bread, baked from wheat flour that has been sifted multiple times to remove all coarseness, provides the foundation for a meal that would feed a peasant family for days. Fresh butter, churned from the cream of his own dairy herds, accompanies honey gathered from hives maintained by his household servants and flavored with herbs grown in the castle's gardens. The ale that accompanies the morning meal comes from barley grown on the Lord's domain lands and brewed according to recipes that his Norman ancestors brought from their homeland. The silver cup from which he drinks, decorated with religious scenes that remind him of his Christian duties, transforms the simple act of refreshment into a ceremony that reinforces his elevated status within the feudal hierarchy. The documents that await Sir Geoffrey's attention during his morning meal represent the complex administrative duties that occupy much of a Norman lord's time. Letters from other nobles, reports from his bailiffs and reeves, petitions from his tenants, and communications from royal officials all require his personal attention and decision. The ability to read and write, skills that distinguish the educated nobility from their illiterate subjects, enables him to maintain the detailed oversight that successful estate management requires. The morning conference with his household officers, the steward who manages his domestic affairs, the marshal who oversees his military obligations, the chaplain who tends to spiritual matters, transforms the solar into a center of administration that governs the lives of hundreds of people scattered across his Yorkshire holdings. These men, drawn from the Norman families that have prospered under the new dispensation, bring to their duties the organizational skills and cultural sophistication that have made the conquest successful. As the morning light strengthens and the sounds of the awakening castle grow louder, Sir Geoffrey prepares to descend to the great hall, where his presence will transform a collection of individuals into a functioning feudal household, each member knowing his place in the hierarchy that extends from the humblest serf to the king himself. The castle kitchens come alive before dawn, with the controlled chaos of feeding a household that numbers nearly 200 souls during the busy seasons when Sir Geoffrey holds court and administers justice to his Yorkshire tenants. The great hearth that dominates the kitchen's stone-vaulted chamber glows with fires that have burned continuously since the castle's construction. Their flames fed by oak logs cut from the Lord's own forests and seasoned for 2 years to burn clean and hot without filling the air with choking smoke. Master Hugh the cook, a Norman, who learned his craft in the kitchens of great lords in Rouen before following his fortune across the Channel, commands this domain with the authority of a military captain directing a siege. His weathered hands, scarred by years of handling hot metal and sharp knives, move with practiced precision as he orchestrates the complex preparations required to maintain the standards of hospitality that Norman culture demands. The white linen cap that covers his graying hair, and the leather apron that protects his woolen tunic, mark him as a craftsman whose skills are valued far above those of common laborers. The copper cauldrons that hang from iron hooks driven into the kitchen's massive oak beams represent a fortune in metal that speaks to Sir Geoffrey's prosperity and his commitment to maintaining a household worthy of his station. These vessels, hammered by skilled smiths in the workshops of London and transported north at considerable expense, can hold enough pottage to feed 50 men, or sufficient ale to slake the thirst of the entire garrison. Their burnished surfaces reflect the firelight like mirrors, creating dancing patterns of light and shadow that transform the utilitarian space into something approaching the magical. The morning's bread-making begins in the hours before dawn, when the castle's bakers kindle their ovens with carefully hoarded coals and begin the process of transforming grain into the staff of life that will sustain the household through another day. The wheat flour used for the Lord's table has been ground fine and sifted multiple times to remove every trace of bran and chaff, creating a white bread so pure it seems almost ethereal compared to the coarse brown loaves that feed the common servants. The ovens themselves, built into the thickness of the castle's walls and lined with stones that hold heat for hours, can bake dozens of loaves simultaneously. The preparation of meat for the day's meals requires skills that border on artistry, as the castle's butchers transform the carcasses of cattle, sheep, and swine into cuts appropriate for different ranks within the household hierarchy. The choicest portions, tender loins and haunches that will grace the high table, receive careful attention from Master Hugh himself, while the tougher cuts destined for the servants' tables are assigned to his assistants. The salt used to preserve meat through the winter months comes from the coastal marshes of Lincolnshire, transported inland at great expense and stored in wooden barrels that protect it from moisture. The herb garden that flourishes within the castle's inner ward provides the seasonings that distinguish Norman cuisine from the plainer fare of the conquered English population. Sage and thyme, rosemary and mint, parsley and fennel grow in carefully tended beds that receive the attention of the castle's gardener and his assistants. These plants, many of them brought from Normandy as seeds or cuttings, connect the castle's kitchens to the culinary traditions of France, while adapting to the harsher climate of northern England.
O Lord, the dairy that occupies a cool chamber beneath the kitchen provides fresh milk, cream, and butter that transform simple ingredients into dishes worthy of a noble table. The castle's dairymaids, chosen for their cleanliness and skill in handling the temperamental processes of cheese-making and butter churning, work in conditions that would be considered luxurious by the standards of peasant households. The wooden churns and cheese presses, crafted by the castle's carpenters according to designs brought from Normandy, enable the production of dairy products that rival those of the finest monasteries. The spice chest that Master Hugh guards with jealous care contains treasures more valuable than silver. Peppercorns from distant India, cinnamon from Ceylon, ginger from the mysterious lands beyond the Mediterranean. These exotic seasonings, purchased at enormous expense from merchants who brave the dangerous trade routes that connect England to the markets of Constantinople and Venice, transform ordinary dishes into culinary experiences that demonstrate the Lord's wealth and sophistication. The wine cellar that lies beneath the kitchen stores the precious vintages that accompany the most important meals served in the great hall. The barrels and amphorae that line the stone walls contain wines from the vineyards of Gascony and Poitou, regions that acknowledge the English king as their overlord, and send their finest products to grace the tables of his loyal vassals. The cellar's cool, constant temperature and protection from light preserve these wines in condition that would satisfy the most discriminating palate. The coordination required to prepare a feast worthy of Sir Geoffrey's station demands organizational skills that rival those of a military campaign. The timing of different dishes must be calculated to ensure that everything reaches the great hall at the proper temperature and in the correct sequence. The roasted meats that form the centerpiece of noble dining require hours of careful attention, while the delicate sauces that accompany them must be prepared at the last moment to preserve their flavor and consistency. The servants who assist Master Hugh in his culinary domain represent a carefully chosen hierarchy of skill and responsibility. The sauce cook, second only to the master in authority, possesses the delicate touch required to create the complex flavors that distinguish Norman cuisine. The pastry cook specializes in the elaborate confections that conclude formal meals, while the roasting cook tends the spits that turn constantly before the great fires, ensuring that meat cooks evenly without burning. The kitchen's connection to the great hall above requires a complex system of service that maintains the dignity appropriate to noble dining, while ensuring that food reaches the table in proper condition. The serving hatches cut into the kitchen ceiling allow dishes to be passed directly to the hall above, while the narrow stairs that connect the two levels accommodate the constant traffic of servants carrying food, wine, and the countless implements required for formal dining. As the morning progresses and the kitchen reaches its full activity, the air fills with the aromas that will soon draw the household to break their fast. The yeasty scent of fresh bread, the rich smell of roasting meat, the herbal fragrances of sauces simmering in copper pots.
The castle's servants begin their daily labors while the household still sleeps. Their movements through stone corridors and wooden stairs, creating a quiet symphony of dedication that keeps the great machine of feudal life functioning smoothly. These men and women, drawn from the English population that surrounds the castle, have learned to serve their Norman masters with the efficiency and discretion that their positions demand, understanding that their livelihoods depend upon anticipating needs before they are expressed, and solving problems before they become crises. Margot the laundress rises before the first cock crows to begin the endless task of maintaining the cleanliness that distinguishes noble households from common dwellings. Her domain, a stone chamber near the castle's well, where water can be drawn easily and wastewater disposed of safely, contains the wooden tubs and iron cauldrons necessary for washing the linens, clothing, and household textiles that accumulate daily in a community of 200 souls. The lye soap she uses, made from wood ash and animal fat according to recipes passed down through generations of castle servants, can remove even the most stubborn stains, while preserving the delicate fabrics that mark the difference between noble and common garments. The rushes that cover the great hall's stone floor require daily attention to maintain the sweet-smelling carpet that cushions footsteps and absorbs the inevitable spills of communal dining. Young Tom the rush-bearer, barely 14, but already experienced in the subtle art of floor maintenance, knows which herbs to scatter among the dried grasses to repel insects and odors, which areas receive the heaviest traffic and need the most frequent renewal, and how to arrange the rushes so they provide maximum comfort while maintaining an appearance worthy of the Lord's dignity. The castle's water supply, drawn from a well that penetrates deep into the limestone bedrock beneath the foundations, requires constant vigilance to ensure its purity and availability. The well keeper, An elderly Saxon named Godwin, who has served the castle since before the conquest, understands the mysterious workings of the windlass and bucket system that brings life-giving water to the surface. His knowledge of the well's moods, when it runs clear and sweet, when it shows signs of contamination, when the water level drops during dry seasons, makes him indispensable despite his inability to speak more than a few words of Norman French. The stables that house Sir Geoffrey's destriers, palfreys, and pack animals represent a world unto themselves, governed by the master of horse and his team of grooms, who understand that the Lord's military effectiveness and social status depend upon the quality of his mounts. The great war horses that carry knights into battle require special care. Their diet of oats and barley, their grooming with brushes and combs that keep their coats gleaming, their exercise regimens that maintain their strength and responsiveness. These animals, worth more than many peasants earn in a lifetime, receive attention that rivals that given to noble children. The castle's armory, presided over by the Master of Arms, contains the weapons and equipment that enable Sir Geoffrey to fulfill his military obligations to the crown and defend his lands against any threat. The maintenance of mail hauberks, sword blades, spear points, and crossbow mechanisms requires specialized knowledge and constant attention. The rust that can destroy iron overnight in England's damp climate must be prevented through daily oiling and careful storage, while the leather components of armor and harness need regular treatment with oils and waxes to maintain their flexibility and strength. The chapel that serves the castle's spiritual needs requires the attention of servants who understand the sacred nature of their duties. The altar linens must be kept spotless, the brass candlesticks polished to mirror brightness, the stone floors swept clean of any debris that might distract from worship. The sacristan who tends these duties, a young man training for holy orders under the castle chaplain's guidance, approaches his work with the reverence appropriate to handling objects blessed for divine service. The castle's gardens, protected within the inner ward's walls, provide fresh vegetables and herbs that supplement the preserved foods that form the bulk of the household's diet. The gardener, a man whose knowledge of plants and seasons makes him valuable despite his humble birth, tends beds of onions and leeks, cabbages and turnips, peas and beans that will grace both noble and common tables. His understanding of when to plant and when to harvest, which plants thrive in Yorkshire's climate and which require special protection, represents knowledge accumulated through generations of careful observation. The brewhouse that produces the ale consumed daily by every member of the household operates under the supervision of the castle's brewster, a woman whose skill in transforming barley into wholesome drink makes her one of the most valued servants in the establishment. The process of malting grain, boiling wort, and fermenting the mixture into ale requires precise timing and careful attention to cleanliness. The quality of the castle's ale reflects directly upon the lord's reputation for hospitality and his ability to provide for his dependents. The castle's seamstresses, working in a chamber that receives the best available light, maintain and create the clothing that marks each person's place in the feudal hierarchy. Their needles flash as they mend tears in servants' tunics, embroider decorations on noble garments, and create new clothing from the bolts of wool and linen that arrive regularly from the castle's estates. The ability to distinguish between the clothing appropriate to different ranks,
To understand which colors and decorations are permitted to which social levels requires knowledge of the complex sumptuary laws that govern medieval society. The castle's messenger, a young man chosen for his ability to ride hard and remember complex verbal instructions, serves as the vital link between Sir Geoffrey and his scattered estates, his fellow nobles, and the royal court. His knowledge of roads and safe lodgings, his ability to recognize the seals and badges that authenticate important communications, and his discretion in handling sensitive information makes him privy to secrets that could affect the fate of kingdoms. The evening's preparation begins even as the morning's work continues, as servants understand that the smooth functioning of castle life requires constant anticipation of future needs. The great hall must be prepared for the day's meals, the Lord's chambers readied for his return from the day's business, and the countless small tasks that maintain civilized life completed before they become urgent necessities. The castle's garrison stirs to life as the morning light reveals the battlements and towers that stand as silent sentinels against any threat to Norman rule in this corner of Yorkshire. The men-at-arms who serve Sir Geoffrey understand that their primary duty extends far beyond the castle's stone walls. They are the instruments through which feudal authority maintains its grip upon a conquered population that has not forgotten the freedom it once knew under Saxon lords. Sergeant William the Bold, a grizzled veteran of campaigns in Wales and Scotland, leads the morning inspection of the castle's defenses with the methodical thoroughness that has kept him alive through 20 years of military service. His weathered hands, scarred by sword cuts and marked by the calluses that come from a lifetime of handling weapons, check each piece of equipment with the knowledge that a loose rivet or dull blade could mean the difference between victory and death when enemies appear at the gates. The crossbowmen who occupy the castle's highest towers represent the cutting edge of military technology. Their weapons capable of penetrating mail at distances that render traditional archery obsolete. These men, recruited from the skilled craftsmen of Norman towns and trained in the use of their complex weapons, understand the mechanical principles that transform human strength into deadly force. The maintenance of their crossbows, the careful waxing of strings, the precise adjustment of triggers, the sharpening of iron bolts, requires technical knowledge that elevates them above common soldiers in both skill and pay. The morning patrol that ventures beyond the castle's walls serves multiple purposes in the complex game of feudal control. The mounted sergeants who ride out at dawn carry with them the visible authority of Norman power, their mail hauberks gleaming in the morning sun and their spear points catching the light like stars. Their presence in the surrounding villages remind the English population that resistance to Norman rule will be met with swift and decisive force, while their observations of local conditions provide Sir Geoffrey with the intelligence necessary to maintain effective control over his domain. The castle's armory, housed in a stone chamber beneath the great tower, contains enough weapons and equipment to arm a small army in times of crisis. The racks of spears and swords, the bundles of crossbow bolts, the suits of mail armor hanging from wooden frames like the shells of iron beetles, all speak to the military reality that underlies the apparent peace of feudal society. The master of arms who presides over this arsenal understands that these weapons represent not merely tools of war, but symbols of the authority that keeps the Norman conquest secure.
The training that occupies the garrison during peaceful periods serves to maintain the fighting edge that distinguishes professional soldiers from the peasant levies that form the bulk of medieval armies. The practice yard that occupies a corner of the castle's bailey echoes with the ring of steel on steel as knights and sergeants hone their skills with sword and spear. The quintain, a wooden post topped with a rotating arm that strikes back at careless riders, teaches the precise timing and balance required for effective mounted combat. The castle's war horses, magnificent destriers bred for strength and courage in battle, receive care that rivals that given to noble children. These animals, trained from birth to charge into the chaos of combat without flinching, represent investments that can bankrupt lesser lords. Their diet of oats and barley, their grooming with brushes that keep their coats gleaming, their exercise regimens that maintain their wind and muscle, all reflect the understanding that cavalry superiority forms the foundation of Norman military dominance.
The intelligence network that keeps Sir Geoffrey informed of potential threats extends far beyond his immediate domain through a web of contacts that includes merchants, pilgrims, and fellow nobles. The information that flows through these channels, reports of unrest in distant shires, news of political changes at court, warnings of Scottish raids along the northern borders, enables him to anticipate problems before they reach his own lands, and to position his forces where they can do the most good. The castle's strategic position, commanding the valley that provides the most direct route between York and the Scottish borders, makes it a vital link in the chain of fortifications that secure Norman rule in northern England. The beacon that crowns the castle's highest tower can signal warnings to neighboring strongholds, while the road that passes beneath its walls ensures that no significant force can move through the region without Sir Geoffrey's knowledge and consent. The siege engines stored in the castle's workshops, mangonels and trebuchets, capable of hurling stones that can shatter wooden palisades and batter down gates, represent the technological superiority that enables small Norman garrisons to dominate much larger English populations. The engineers who maintain these weapons, men trained in the mathematical principles that govern their operation, possess knowledge that makes them valuable beyond their humble birth. The castle's role as a center of royal administration requires the garrison to serve functions that extend beyond purely military duties. The collection of taxes, the enforcement of royal justice, the maintenance of roads and bridges, all depend upon the implicit threat of force that the castle's presence represents. The sergeants who accompany the Lord's bailiffs on their rounds through the countryside carry swords not merely for protection, but as symbols of the authority that backs up every royal command. The night watch that maintains vigilance during the hours of darkness understands that enemies prefer to move under cover of darkness, when their approach might go undetected until too late. The sentries who pace the battlements, their footsteps echoing off stone walls, carry horns that can summon the entire garrison to arms within minutes. Their eyes, trained to detect movement in the shadows beyond the castle's walls, serve as the early warning system that could save hundreds of lives. The loyalty that binds the garrison to Sir Geoffrey extends beyond mere payment for services rendered to encompass the personal bonds that feudal society creates between lord and man. These soldiers have sworn oaths of fealty that make them extensions of their lord's will, bound by honor and self-interest to defend his lands and his family against any threat. The ceremonies that mark the swearing of these oaths, conducted in the castle's chapel with sacred relics as witnesses, create spiritual as well as temporal obligations. As the morning progresses and the garrison settles into the routines that maintain military readiness, the castle's walls echo with the sounds of organized violence held in check. The scrape of whetstones against steel, the thud of arrows striking targets, the measured tread of sentries maintaining their eternal watch.
The great hall transforms at midday into a theater of feudal ceremony, where every gesture, every seating arrangement, every detail of service reinforces the social hierarchy that governs life within the castle walls. The sound of the horn that summons the household to the principal meal of the day echoes through stone corridors and wooden chambers, calling together a community that ranges from noble knights to humble scullery maids, each knowing precisely where they belong in the elaborate dance of medieval dining. The high table, elevated on a wooden platform that raises it above the common dining area, serves as the focal point for a ceremony that transforms the simple act of eating into a display of power and authority. Sir Geoffrey takes his place at the center of this table with the gravity befitting his station, while Lady Matilda assumes her position at his right hand, her elaborate headdress and richly embroidered gown marking her as the embodiment of noble femininity. The guests who occupy the remaining seats at the high table, visiting knights, local clergy, and household officers of sufficient rank, understand that their proximity to the Lord reflects their importance within the feudal hierarchy. The ceremony of hand-washing that precedes the meal follows rituals as precise as those observed in royal courts, with servants bearing silver ewers and linen towels approaching each diner according to their rank and station. The water, scented with rose petals and warmed to the perfect temperature, cleanses not merely the hands, but serves as a symbolic purification that prepares the participants for the sacred act of communal dining. The grace spoken by the castle chaplain, delivered in Latin that most of the assembled company cannot understand, connects the earthly feast to divine providence, and reminds all present of their dependence upon God's bounty. The procession of dishes from the kitchen to the great hall follows a choreography as complex as any court dance, with servants moving in carefully orchestrated patterns that ensure each course arrives at the proper temperature and in the correct sequence. The trenchers of day-old bread that serve as plates for the diners represent more than mere convenience. Their quality and thickness indicate the status of those who will use them, with the finest white bread reserved for the high table, while coarser brown loaves serve the common tables. The carving of meat at the high table requires skills that elevate the server to the status of an artist, his knife work displaying the joints and portions with a precision that speaks to years of training in the subtle art of noble service. The choicest cuts, the tender loins and haunches that represent the finest products of Sir Geoffrey's estates, are presented to the Lord and his most honored guests with ceremony that acknowledges both the quality of the food and the dignity of those who receive it. The wine that accompanies the meal flows from silver pitchers into cups of precious metal, the quality and quantity of each person's portion carefully calibrated to reflect their position within the household hierarchy. The vintages from Gascony and Poitou that grace the high table represent wealth that could feed a peasant family for months, while the common tables receive ale brewed from barley grown on the castle's own lands.
The cupbearers who serve these beverages, chosen for their discretion and loyalty as much as their skill, understand that they handle not merely drink, but symbols of their Lord's prosperity and generosity.
The entertainment that accompanies the meal serves purposes beyond mere amusement, with minstrels and storytellers weaving tales that reinforce the values and beliefs that support feudal society. The songs of Roland and Oliver, of Arthur and his knights, of saints and martyrs who died for their faith, create a cultural atmosphere that celebrates the virtues of courage, loyalty, and piety that Norman society demands of its members. The harp music that provides a backdrop to conversation speaks to the refinement and sophistication that distinguish noble households from common dwellings. The conversation that flows around the high table during the meal touches upon matters of politics, warfare, and administration that affect the lives of thousands of people scattered across Sir Geoffrey's Yorkshire estates. The reports from bailiffs and reeves, the news brought by traveling merchants and pilgrims, the letters from fellow nobles and royal officials, all contribute to a flow of information that enables the Lord to make the decisions that govern his domain. The ability to participate in these discussions, to understand the complex relationships that bind the feudal world together, marks the difference between the educated nobility and their illiterate subjects. The elaborate courses that follow one another in stately procession demonstrate the wealth and sophistication that Norman culture has brought to England. Roasted peacocks presented with their feathers restored, subtleties crafted from sugar and spices into fantastic shapes, pies containing multiple types of meat arranged in complex patterns, all speak to the culinary artistry that distinguishes noble dining from the simple fare of common folk. The spices that flavor these dishes, imported at enormous expense from the distant lands of the East, transform ordinary ingredients into exotic experiences that demonstrate the Lord's connections to the wider world. The ceremony of the loving cup, passed from hand to hand around the high table, creates bonds of fellowship and mutual obligation that strengthen the ties binding the feudal community together. Each person who drinks from the silver vessel acknowledges their dependence upon their neighbors and their commitment to the common good that makes civilized life possible. The toasts that accompany this ritual, to the king's health, to the success of the harvest, to the souls of the departed, connect the earthly community to the larger purposes that give meaning to medieval existence. The alms that are distributed to the poor who gather at the castle gates during the meal reflect the Christian duty of charity that tempers the harsh realities of feudal society. The broken meats and leftover bread that might otherwise go to waste find their way to hungry mouths, while the coins that accompany these gifts provide the means for the destitute to purchase necessities that the castle cannot supply. This charity, performed with ceremony that emphasizes the Lord's generosity and Christian virtue, serves both spiritual and practical purposes in maintaining social stability. As the meal draws toward its conclusion and the afternoon's business beckons, the great hall gradually empties as each member of the household returns to the duties that define their place in the complex organism of castle life. Their bellies filled and their understanding of their position within the feudal hierarchy reinforced by another successful performance of the daily drama of noble dining. The afternoon hours bring a different rhythm to castle life, as the household settles into the specialized crafts and trades that transform raw materials into the goods necessary for maintaining a self-sufficient feudal community. The workshops that occupy the castle's outer bailey echo with the sounds of skilled labor, the ring of hammer on anvil, the scrape of plane on wood, the rhythmic thud of the weaver's loom, creating a symphony of productivity that speaks to the complex economy that supports Norman civilization in this corner of Yorkshire. The castle's smithy, presided over by Master Robert the Smith, represents the technological heart of the feudal community, where iron ore from the Yorkshire dales is transformed into the tools and weapons that make civilized life possible. The great bellows that feed air to the forge, operated by an apprentice whose muscles have grown strong from years of pumping, create temperatures hot enough to make iron malleable, while the master's skilled hands shape blowing metal into horseshoes, nails, knife blades, and the countless iron implements that modern life requires. The sparks that fly from his hammer strikes create brief stars in the smoky air of the workshop, while the hiss of hot metal plunged into water marks another successful transformation of raw material into useful object. The carpenter's workshop, fragrant with the scent of fresh-cut wood and the oils used to preserve timber, produces the furniture and structural elements that make stone walls habitable. Master Thomas the carpenter, whose knowledge of wood grain and joinery techniques rivals that of the cathedral builders, shapes oak and ash into tables and benches, chests and coffers, the wooden components of siege engines, and the intricate mechanisms of the castle's gates and drawbridges. His apprentices, learning the mysteries of their craft through years of patient observation and practice, understand that their skills will always be in demand in a world where wood provides the material for everything from spoon handles to ship hulls. The castle's weaving shed, where the women of the household transform wool from Sir Geoffrey's flocks into the cloth that clothes the entire community, operates under the supervision of Mistress Eleanor, whose knowledge of spinning and dyeing has made her indispensable despite her English birth. The great looms that dominate the workshop, their wooden frames polished smooth by years of use, produce cloth that ranges from the coarse brown wool worn by servants to the fine fabrics dyed with expensive imported colors that mark the garments of the nobility. The rhythmic clacking of the shuttles creates a percussion that accompanies the women's conversations, their voices weaving together stories and gossip that bind the female community together as surely as their threads create cloth. The castle's brewery, housed in a stone building that maintains the cool temperatures necessary for proper fermentation, produces the ale that serves as the primary beverage for every member of the household, from lord to scullery maid. The brewster who oversees this operation, a woman whose understanding of the mysterious processes that transform grain into wholesome drink makes her one of the most valued servants in the establishment, tends her wooden vats and copper kettles with the attention that others might give to sacred relics. The quality of the castle's ale reflects directly upon Sir Geoffrey's reputation for hospitality and his ability to provide for his dependents.
The merchants who arrive at the castle gates during the afternoon hours bring news from the wider world along with the exotic goods that cannot be produced within the feudal community. These traveling traders, their pack animals laden with spices from distant lands, fine cloth from Flemish looms, and wine from French vineyards, represent the commercial networks that connect even remote Yorkshire castles to the markets of London, Paris, and beyond. The negotiations that determine the prices of their wares involve not merely economic calculation, but political intelligence, as the cost of pepper or silk reflects the stability of trade routes that span continents. The castle's scriptorium, where the chaplain and his assistants maintain the written records that document the complex legal and financial relationships of feudal society, represents the intellectual center of the community. The parchment scrolls and bound volumes that line the wooden shelves contain the charters and deeds that establish Sir Geoffrey's rights to his lands, the account rolls that track the income from his estates, and the correspondence that maintains his connections to the wider world of Norman politics. The careful script that records these documents, written with quills cut from goose feathers and ink made from oak galls, preserves information that could determine the fate of families and communities. The castle's gardens, protected within the inner ward's walls and tended by servants who understand the mysteries of plant growth and seasonal cycles, provide fresh vegetables and herbs that supplement the preserved foods that form the bulk of the household's diet. The neat rows of cabbages and turnips, onions and leeks represent a victory over the harsh Yorkshire climate that requires constant vigilance and skilled cultivation. The herb garden that supplies the kitchen with seasonings and the infirmary with medicinal plants contains knowledge accumulated through generations of careful observation and experimentation. The afternoon training sessions that occupy the castle's young men serve purposes beyond mere physical exercise, instilling the values and skills that will enable them to take their places in feudal society. The practice with sword and spear, the lessons in horsemanship and the use of armor, the instruction in the complex codes of chivalric behavior, all prepare these youths for lives that may require them to lead men in battle, administer justice in their Lord's name, and uphold the Christian values that legitimize Norman rule over the conquered English population. The castle's mews, where the hunting birds that provide both sport and fresh meat for the Lord's table are housed and trained, represent a specialized craft that requires years of study to master. The falconer who tends these magnificent creatures, his leather glove scarred by countless encounters with sharp talons, understands the psychology of predatory birds well enough to transform wild creatures into willing partners in the ancient art of hunting. The hooded peregrines and goshawks that perch on their wooden blocks represent investments in both practical utility and aristocratic pleasure. As the afternoon light begins to slant through the narrow windows of the workshops, and the sounds of productive labor continue to echo through the castle's courtyards, the complex economy that supports feudal life reveals itself in all its intricate interdependence, each craft and trade contributing to the whole that makes civilized existence possible in this stone fortress rising from the Yorkshire moors. The evening hours transform the great hall into a theater of entertainment and fellowship, where the harsh realities of feudal life give way to the gentler pleasures of music, storytelling, and courtly conversation. As the last light of day fades from the narrow windows and torches are kindled in their iron sconces, the stone walls that have witnessed the day's business of administration and justice now echo with the sounds of laughter and song that remind all present that life offers beauty as well as duty. The minstrels who arrive with the evening meal bring with them the cultural treasures of Norman civilization, songs composed in the courts of France, tales of heroic deeds performed in distant lands, melodies that speak to the refined sensibilities that distinguish noble households from common dwellings.
Master Guillaume the minstrel, whose skill with harp and voice has earned him welcome in the greatest halls of England and Normandy, understands that his role extends beyond mere entertainment to encompass the preservation and transmission of the values that bind feudal society together. The great fireplace that dominates the hall's center becomes the focal point for an evening's entertainment that serves multiple purposes within the complex social structure of castle life. The warmth that radiates from the burning logs draws the household together in a circle that temporarily softens the rigid hierarchies of daily existence, while the dancing light creates an atmosphere of intimacy and fellowship that encourages the sharing of stories and the formation of personal bonds that strengthen the feudal community. The chess sets that appear on small tables throughout the hall represent more than mere games. They serve as training grounds for the strategic thinking that successful lordship requires. The ivory pieces, carved by skilled artisans in the workshops of London and decorated with scenes from courtly life, move across boards of alternating light and dark squares in patterns that mirror the complex relationships of feudal society. The ability to play chess well marks a person as educated and sophisticated, while the games themselves provide opportunities for private conversation and the subtle negotiation of alliances and obligations. The storytellers who hold court in the hall's corners weave tales that serve as both entertainment and instruction, their narratives reinforcing the moral and social codes that govern medieval life. The stories of King Arthur and his knights, of Charlemagne and his paladins, of saints and martyrs who died for their faith, create a cultural atmosphere that celebrates the virtues of courage, loyalty, and piety that Norman society demands of its members. These tales, passed down through generations of oral tradition, preserve the collective memory of a civilization and provide models of behavior for those who hear them. The wine that flows more freely during the evening hours loosens tongues and encourages the kind of intimate conversation that builds the personal relationships upon which feudal society depends. The vintages from Sir Geoffrey's own cellars, carefully chosen to complement the evening's entertainment, create an atmosphere of conviviality that allows for the discussion of matters that might be too delicate for the formal atmosphere of the midday meal. The silver cups that hold these precious liquids catch the firelight like jewels, their gleaming surfaces reflecting the faces of those who drink from them. The dancing that sometimes follows the evening meal provides an opportunity for the younger members of the household to display their grace and breeding while observing the complex courtship rituals that govern noble marriage. The steps and patterns of these dances, learned through careful instruction and practiced until they become second nature, serve as a form of social communication that allows young people to express interest and attraction within the bounds of propriety that medieval society demands. The ladies of the household, freed from the day's domestic responsibilities, gather around Lady Matilda to engage in the refined pursuits that mark their elevated status within the feudal hierarchy. Their needlework, creating tapestries and vestments that will adorn the castle's walls and altar, represents both artistic achievement and practical skill. The conversations that accompany this work, touching upon matters of fashion, family, and faith, create bonds of female solidarity that provide support and companionship in a world dominated by masculine concerns. The evening prayers that conclude the day's activities bring the entire household together in acknowledgement of their dependence upon divine grace and their obligations to live according to Christian principles. The chapel
illuminated by candles that cast dancing shadows on stone walls decorated with painted scenes from Scripture, becomes a sanctuary where earthly distinctions temporarily fade before the greater reality of spiritual equality. The Latin chants that rise toward the vaulted ceiling carry the hopes and fears of all who dwell within the castle's walls. The private conversations that take place in the solar and other chambers during the evening hours allow for the discussion of sensitive matters that require discretion and privacy. The negotiations between Sir Geoffrey and his fellow nobles, the planning of military campaigns or political alliances, the resolution of disputes that could affect the stability of the entire region, all require the kind of careful deliberation that can only take place away from the public eye. The castle's library, a small collection of precious manuscripts housed in a chamber adjacent to the chapel, provides intellectual nourishment for those capable of reading the Latin texts that preserve the wisdom of classical antiquity and Christian theology. The books themselves, copied by hand in monastery scriptoriums and illuminated with gold leaf and brilliant colors, represent treasures more valuable than silver or gold. The knowledge they contain, histories of ancient Rome, treatises on law and governance, commentaries on Scripture, provides the intellectual foundation for the civilization that Norman culture has brought to England. The evening's entertainment serves not merely to pass the time, but to reinforce the cultural bonds that hold the feudal community together. The shared experience of music and story, the common participation in games and conversation, the collective acknowledgement of divine authority, all contribute to the sense of belonging and purpose that enables a diverse group of individuals to function as a unified household. As the evening progresses and the fire burns lower in the great hearth, the sounds of entertainment gradually give way to the quieter activities that prepare the household for sleep. The servants who clear away the remnants of the evening's festivities, the guards who take up their positions for the night watch, the family members who retire to their private chambers, all participate in the daily rhythm that has governed castle life since the stones were first laid in their courses.
The castle's chapel fills with the soft glow of beeswax candles as the household gathers for Compline, the final prayer service that marks the transition from day to night and prepares souls for the journey through darkness toward another dawn. The stone walls, decorated with painted scenes from the life of Christ and the martyrdom of saints, seem to absorb the flickering light and transform it into something approaching the divine radiance that medieval theology promises to the faithful. The scent of incense, rising from a bronze censer swung by the castle's chaplain, mingles with the smoke of the candles to create an atmosphere that lifts the spirit above earthly concerns. Father Benedict, the Norman priest who serves as the castle's chaplain and spiritual guide, leads the evening prayers with the authority that comes from years of theological study in the cathedral schools of Rouen and Paris. His voice, trained in the precise pronunciation of Latin that marks an educated cleric, carries the ancient words of the Psalms and Canticles that have comforted Christian souls for centuries. The breviary from which he reads, its vellum pages illuminated with gold leaf and brilliant pigments, represents not merely a book, but a gateway to the divine wisdom that governs all earthly existence. The congregation that fills the chapel's narrow nave reflects the entire hierarchy of castle life, from Sir Geoffrey and Lady Matilda kneeling on cushioned prie-dieu near the altar, to the humblest scullery maids standing at the back of the chamber. This temporary equality before God serves as a reminder that earthly distinctions, however important in daily life, pale before the greater reality of divine judgment that awaits all souls regardless of their worldly station. The shared participation in prayer creates bonds of spiritual fellowship that complement and strengthen the feudal obligations that bind the community together. The evening examination of conscience that forms part of the Compline service requires each member of the congregation to reflect upon the day's actions and acknowledge their failures to live according to Christian principles. The sins that weigh upon medieval souls, pride, anger, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, and sloth, find their antidotes in the virtues that the Church teaches and the sacraments that provide divine grace to those who seek forgiveness with sincere hearts. The act of confession, whether public or private, serves to cleanse the soul and prepare it for the spiritual dangers that darkness may bring. The relics that occupy places of honor within the chapel, a fragment of bone from St. Thomas of Canterbury, a piece of wood claimed to come from the true cross, a vial of oil that has touched the tomb of St. Martin of Tours, serve as tangible connections to the divine power that protects the faithful from the forces of evil that medieval belief holds to be constantly active in the world. The prayers offered before these sacred objects carry special efficacy, their power enhanced by the holiness of the saints whose earthly remains they represent. The stained glass windows that filter the last light of day into jeweled patterns on the chapel floor tell stories that instruct the illiterate in the fundamental truths of Christian faith. The scenes of Christ's passion, the martyrdom of saints, the triumph of good over evil depicted in brilliant blues and reds speak to the eye what the Latin liturgy conveys to the ear. These windows, crafted by master glaziers in the workshops of Canterbury and installed at enormous expense, transform the simple act of looking into an opportunity for spiritual meditation.
The evening's scripture reading, chosen from the lectionary that governs the Church's liturgical year, provides spiritual nourishment that complements the physical sustenance of the day's meals. The words of the prophets and apostles, the parables of Christ, the wisdom of the Psalms, all offer guidance for living according to divine will in a world that constantly tempts souls towards sin and damnation. The ability to understand these readings, to grasp their theological significance and apply their lessons to daily life, marks the difference between the educated clergy and the faithful laity who depend upon their spiritual guidance. The prayers for the dead that conclude the evening service remember those who have gone before and seek divine mercy for souls that may still suffer in purgatory for sins committed during earthly life. The names of departed family members, fallen comrades, and deceased servants are recited with the understanding that the prayers of the living can ease the sufferings of the dead and hasten their journey toward eternal bliss. This communion between the living and the dead creates a sense of continuity that extends beyond the grave and connects each generation to those that came before and those that will follow. The blessing that Father Benedict pronounces over the assembled congregation as the service concludes invokes divine protection for the hours of darkness that lie ahead.
The sign of the cross that each person makes upon their forehead, lips, and heart serves as a spiritual armor against the temptations and dangers that medieval belief holds to be especially active during the night hours. The holy water that some sprinkle upon themselves as they leave the chapel provides additional protection against the evil spirits that are thought to prowl in darkness. The private devotions that some members of the household continue after the formal service ends reflect the personal piety that medieval Christianity encourages among the faithful. The rosaries that click softly in the darkness, the whispered prayers offered before favorite saints, the moments of silent meditation before the altar, all represent individual responses to the divine call that transcends the communal worship of the liturgy. The castle's library, housed in the chamber adjacent to the chapel, contains the theological works that provide intellectual foundation for the faith that governs medieval life. The volumes of Augustine and Aquinas, the biblical commentaries of the Church Fathers, the lives of saints that provide models of Christian virtue, all offer deeper understanding of the mysteries that the evening's prayers have celebrated. The ability to read these works, to engage with their complex theological arguments, marks the highest level of medieval education and spiritual sophistication. As the chapel empties and the household prepares for sleep, the sense of spiritual protection that the evening prayers have provided settles over the castle like a benediction, creating an atmosphere of peace and security that enables rest in the knowledge that divine providence watches over all who dwell within these stone walls.
The castle's transformation from day to night brings with it a different kind of vigilance, as the night watch takes up positions that have been maintained since the first Norman stones were laid upon English soil. The torches that flicker along the battlements create pools of dancing light that push back the darkness, while casting long shadows that could conceal approaching enemies. The men who assume these duties understand that their alertness during the hours of darkness may determine whether the household awakens to another peaceful dawn or to the clash of steel and the cries of battle. Sergeant Marcus the Watchful, whose 20 years of military service have taught him to read the subtle signs that distinguish normal night sounds from those that herald danger, leads the evening inspection of the castle's defenses with methodical thoroughness. His weathered hands check each gate and postern, every length of chain that secures the drawbridge, each mechanism that could fail at the moment when lives depend upon its proper function. The keys that hang from his belt, symbols of the trust that Sir Geoffrey has placed in his loyalty and competence, unlock the secrets of the castle's defensive systems. The sentries who take their positions along the wall walk carry horns that can summon the entire garrison to arms within minutes of detecting a threat. These instruments, carved from the horns of aurochs and decorated with silver bands that catch the torchlight, represent the communication system that could mean the difference between successful defense and catastrophic defeat. The codes that govern their use, different patterns of blasts that indicate the direction and nature of approaching danger, require memorization and practice that occupies part of every guard's training. The great gates that control access to the castle's inner ward receive special attention during the night watch, their massive oak timbers reinforced with iron bands that could withstand the assault of the most powerful siege engines.
The portcullis that can drop to seal these gates in moments of crisis hangs suspended by chains whose links have been forged by the castle's own smiths and tested to ensure they will not fail when lives depend upon their strength. The murder holes that pierce the gatehouse ceiling allow defenders to rain death upon any enemy who might breach the outer defenses. The castle's well, source of the water that could sustain the garrison through a prolonged siege, receives constant protection from guards who understand that poisoning this vital resource represents one of the most effective ways to force a fortress to surrender. The wooden cover that protects the well from contamination bears locks whose keys remain in the personal custody of Sir Geoffrey himself, while the rope and bucket system that draws water from the depths below shows signs of the constant maintenance that keeps it in perfect working order. The armory that houses the castle's weapons and equipment remains under guard throughout the night, its iron-bound doors secured with locks that would challenge the most skilled burglar. The crossbows and quarrels stored within these walls, the suits of mail armor hanging from wooden frames, the bundles of spears and swords that could arm additional defenders in times of crisis, all represent the military resources that enable a relatively small garrison to hold a fortress against much larger attacking forces.
The beacon that crowns the castle's highest tower stands ready to signal warnings to neighboring strongholds should enemies appear in sufficient numbers to threaten the entire region. The pile of seasoned wood that feeds this signal fire has been carefully prepared to burn bright and clean, its smoke visible for miles across the Yorkshire countryside during daylight hours, while its flames can pierce the darkness of night. The system of relay beacons that connects this castle to others throughout the north represents a communication network that enables rapid response to threats that might overwhelm isolated garrisons. The night patrol that ventures beyond the castle's walls serves as an early warning system that could provide precious minutes of advance notice should enemies approach under cover of darkness. These mounted sergeants, their horses' hooves muffled with leather wrappings to reduce noise, follow routes that take them through the villages and farmsteads that surround the castle. Their knowledge of the local terrain, gained through years of riding these same paths, enables them to detect signs of disturbance that might escape less experienced eyes. The castle's dogs, trained to detect the scent of strangers and alert their handlers to approaching danger, patrol the outer bailey with their keen senses supplementing human vigilance. These animals, bred for courage and loyalty as much as for their hunting abilities, represent an additional layer of security that could provide warning of threats that might escape human detection. Their handlers, men who have learned to interpret the subtle changes in canine behavior that indicate the presence of intruders, form bonds with their charges that approach the mystical. The Night Watch's responsibilities extend beyond mere military vigilance to encompass the protection of the castle's inhabitants from the fires that represent one of the greatest threats to medieval communities. The leather buckets filled with water or sand that stand ready at strategic points throughout the castle, the long-handled hooks that can pull burning thatch from roofs before flames spread, the knowledge of which buildings should be sacrificed to save others, all reflect understanding gained through bitter experience of fire's destructive power. The passwords that change nightly and must be known by anyone moving through the castle after dark
serve as protection against infiltrators who might attempt to gain access by impersonating legitimate inhabitants. These secret words, chosen by Sir Geoffrey himself and communicated only to those who need to know them, create a security system that relies upon human memory rather than physical barriers. The penalties for revealing these passwords to unauthorized persons reflect the life and death importance of maintaining their secrecy. The night watch's vigil continues through the darkest hours, when human alertness naturally wanes and the temptation to sleep becomes almost overwhelming. The techniques that experienced guards use to maintain their vigilance, the controlled movement that keeps blood flowing, the mental exercises that prevent the mind from wandering, the partnership systems that ensure no sentry stands alone, represent knowledge accumulated through generations of military service. As the night deepens and the castle settles into the rhythm of darkness, the men who maintain this eternal watch understand that their vigilance protects not merely stone walls and material possessions, but the entire way of life that Norman civilization has brought to this corner of England.
The private chambers of the castle's noble family settle into the intimate rhythms of night, as heavy curtains are drawn around beds, and the day's public ceremonies give way to the quieter rituals of rest and recovery. The solar that serves as Sir Geoffrey's private retreat from the demands of lordship becomes a sanctuary where the weight of feudal responsibility can be temporarily set aside, though never entirely forgotten. The thick stone walls that provide security during daylight hours now offer blessed privacy from the constant attention that noble status demands. Lady Matilda's chamber, adjacent to her husband's solar and connected by a private passage that allows for discreet communication, represents the feminine sphere within the masculine world of castle life. Her waiting women, chosen as much for their discretion as for their skill in the intimate arts of noble service, attend to the complex process of preparing their mistress for sleep. The removal of the elaborate headdresses and veils that mark her status, the careful folding of gowns whose rich fabrics represent fortunes in themselves, the gentle brushing of hair that has been confined all day within wimples and nets, all follow rituals that transform a public figure into a private woman. The bed that dominates Sir Geoffrey's solar, raised on a wooden platform and surrounded by curtains of fine linen that can be drawn to create a private world within the larger chamber, represents luxury that would astound a peasant family. The mattress, stuffed with goose down and covered with sheets of linen so fine they seem almost transparent, provides comfort that enables the deep sleep necessary for a man who must make decisions affecting hundreds of lives. The pillows, filled with the softest feathers and encased in silk brought from distant Constantinople, cradle heads that carry the weight of feudal authority. The brazier that glows in one corner of the chamber provides warmth that makes the stone walls bearable during Yorkshire's harsh winters, its charcoal fuel carefully selected to burn without producing the choking smoke that could disturb sleep. The servant who tends this fire throughout the night, sleeping on a pallet near the door where he can respond instantly to his lord's needs, represents the human cost of noble comfort. His vigilance ensures that the chamber remains at the perfect temperature, while his presence provides security against the dangers that medieval imagination populates the darkness with. The private prayers that conclude each day connect the Lord and Lady to the divine authority that legitimizes their earthly power, while acknowledging their dependence upon God's grace for continued prosperity. The ivory crucifix that hangs above their bed, carved by master craftsmen in the workshops of Paris and blessed by the Archbishop of Canterbury himself, serves as a constant reminder that temporal authority exists only through divine sufferance. The Latin phrases they recite, learned in childhood and repeated nightly throughout their adult lives, create a spiritual armor against the temptations and dangers that threaten noble souls. The children of the household, when they are present in the castle rather than fostered with other noble families as custom demands, sleep in chambers that reflect their position as heirs to feudal authority, while acknowledging their current dependence upon adult protection. Young Geoffrey, Sir Geoffrey's eldest son and heir to the family's Yorkshire estates, occupies a chamber that contains the books and weapons appropriate to his future station. The wooden sword that hangs beside his bed, crafted by the castle's carpenters as a training weapon, represents the military skills he must master to fulfill his destiny as a Norman knight.
The guest chambers that accommodate visiting nobles and important clergy reflect the hospitality that feudal society demands, while providing the comfort appropriate to elevated status. The beds in these rooms, though not as luxurious as those in the family's private quarters, offer amenities that would seem miraculous to common travelers. The tapestries that warm the stone walls, the silver basins that provide for washing, the candles that illuminate the chambers with clean burning light, all speak to the wealth and sophistication that mark a well-managed noble household. The servants who sleep throughout the castle occupy spaces that reflect their position in the feudal hierarchy, while acknowledging their essential role in maintaining the complex organism of castle life. The household knights sleep on pallets in chambers near their lord's quarters, ready to respond instantly to any threat that might emerge during the night hours. The men-at-arms occupy barracks in the gatehouse and towers, their weapons within easy reach, and their ears attuned to the sounds that might herald danger. The castle's women, from Lady Matilda's waiting women to the humblest kitchen maids, sleep in chambers that provide security and modest comfort, while maintaining the separation of sexes that medieval morality demands. The dormitory that houses the unmarried female servants, presided over by an elderly woman whose virtue and discretion are beyond question, creates a protected environment where young women can serve the household without compromising their reputations or their prospects for honorable marriage. The night sounds that filter through the castle's stone walls create a symphony of security and domesticity that speaks to the successful functioning of the feudal community. The gentle snoring of sleeping servants, the soft footsteps of guards making their rounds, the distant lowing of cattle in the bailey, all contribute to an atmosphere of peace and prosperity that enables restful sleep. The absence of these familiar sounds would alert experienced ears to potential danger more quickly than any alarm bell. The dreams that visit the castle's inhabitants during the night hours reflect their positions within the feudal hierarchy and their hopes for the future. Sir Geoffrey may dream of successful military campaigns or profitable harvests, while Lady Matilda's sleep might be filled with visions of her children's advancement or the completion of the tapestry that has occupied her attention for months. The servants dream simpler dreams,
of full bellies, warm beds, and the security that comes from faithful service to generous masters. The chamber pots and other necessities of nighttime comfort, crafted from pewter or ceramic and decorated according to the status of their users, acknowledge the physical realities of human existence while maintaining the dignity appropriate to different social levels. The servants who empty and clean these vessels, performing their duties with discretion that preserves their betters' privacy, represent the invisible labor that makes civilized life possible. As the castle settles into the deepest hours of night, and the rhythm of breathing replaces the sounds of daily activity, the stone walls that have witnessed the day's ceremonies and struggles now shelter the vulnerable sleep of those who must rise with dawn to resume their roles in the eternal drama of feudal life.
The first pale light of dawn touches the eastern windows of the castle as another day begins in the endless cycle that has governed feudal life since Duke William's victory transformed England from Saxon kingdom into Norman realm. The bell that calls the household to prime rings with the same bronze voice that has marked the canonical hours for decades, its sound echoing through stone corridors where the dreams of night give way to the duties of day. The servants who rise before their betters understand that their early labors create the foundation upon which the entire elaborate structure of castle life depends. The great hall stirs to life as the embers of last night's fire are coaxed back into flame by servants whose movements through the pre-dawn darkness follow patterns worn smooth by countless repetitions. The rushes that carpet the stone floor release their herbal fragrance as feet disturb them, while the tapestries that warm the walls seem to absorb the growing light and transform it into the rich colors that speak of Norman wealth and sophistication. The high table, cleared of yesterday's feast and prepared for today's breaking of fast, awaits the ceremony that will once again display the hierarchy that governs every aspect of medieval existence. Sir Joffre's Solar witnesses the same morning rituals that have marked the beginning of each day since he took possession of these Yorkshire lands through Royal Brant and his own military service. The selection of garments appropriate to the day's duties, the careful arrangement of jewelry and ornaments that display his status, the morning prayers that connect earthly authority to its divine source, all follow patterns that provide structure and meaning to the exercise of feudal power. The documents that await his attention, the decisions that must be made, the justice that must be administered, these responsibilities renew themselves with each dawn like the eternal cycle of seasons. The kitchen's transformation from the quiet efficiency of night preparation to the controlled chaos of feeding 200 souls follows rhythms as predictable as the movement of stars across the heavens. Master Hugh the cook surveys his domain with the satisfaction of a general whose troops have proven their worth in countless campaigns, while his assistants begin the complex choreography that will produce the day's meals. The bread that emerges from the ovens, the ale that flows from wooden casks, the meat that roasts on iron spits, all represent the abundance that marks a well-managed feudal household. The castle's defenses receive their morning inspection from sergeants whose vigilance never wavers, their experienced eyes checking each gate and tower for signs of the wear that could compromise security when enemies appear at the walls. The weapons that gleam in the armory, the horses that stamp in their stalls, the men who practice their skills in the bailey,
all maintain the military readiness that enables a Norman garrison to hold conquered territory against any threat that might emerge from the surrounding countryside. The chapel fills with the household for the morning prayers that acknowledge their dependence upon divine grace and their obligations to live according to Christian principles. Father Benedict's voice carries the ancient Latin phrases that connect this remote Yorkshire castle to the universal church that spans continents and centuries, while the congregation's responses create a harmony that transcends the social divisions that govern secular life. The incense that rises toward the vaulted ceiling carries with it the hopes and fears of all who dwell within these stone walls.
The workshops that occupy the castle's outer bailey echo with the sounds of productive labor as craftsmen resume the work that transforms raw materials into the goods necessary for maintaining civilized life. The ring of hammer on anvil, the scrape of plane on wood, the rhythmic clacking of looms, all contribute to the symphony of human industry that speaks to the complex economy supporting Norman civilization in this corner of England. The apprentices who learn their trades through patient observation understand that their skills will always find employment in a world that constantly requires the products of human craftsmanship. The merchants who arrive with the morning light bring news from the wider world along with the exotic goods that cannot be produced within the feudal community. Their pack animals, laden with spices and silk, wine and weapons, represent the commercial networks that connect even remote castles to the markets of London, Paris, and beyond. The negotiations that determine prices involve not merely economic calculation, but political intelligence, as the cost of pepper reflects the stability of trade routes that span continents. The administrative duties that occupy much of Sir Geoffrey's morning, the hearing of petitions from his tenants, the resolution of disputes that could affect the stability of his domain, the correspondence with fellow nobles and royal officials, transform the solar into a center of governance that affects the lives of thousands of people scattered across his Yorkshire holdings. The ability to read and write, the knowledge of law and custom, the understanding of the complex relationships that bind feudal society together, all enable him to exercise the authority that his military service has earned. The children of the household, when present rather than fostered with other noble families, begin their education in the skills and knowledge appropriate to their future stations. Young Geoffrey practices with wooden weapons under the watchful eye of the master-at-arms, while his sisters learn the domestic arts that will enable them to manage great households of their own. The books that teach them to read Latin, the musical instruments that develop their cultural refinement, the games that sharpen their strategic thinking, all prepare them for lives that will require both practical competence and social sophistication. The eternal cycle continues, as it has since the conquest brought Norman civilization to English soil. The same sacred duties that have governed castle life through decades of peace and war, prosperity and hardship, the changing of seasons, and the succession of generations. The stone walls that shelter this community will outlast the lives of all who currently dwell within them, while the feudal obligations that bind lord and vassal, master and servant, will continue to structure society long after individual names are forgotten. The morning light strengthens as it has for countless dawns before,
illuminating the same activities, the same relationships, the same hopes and fears that define human existence within the protective embrace of Norman stone. Another day begins in the endless cycle of feudal life, each dawn bringing the same sacred purposes that have sustained this civilization since Duke William's banner first flew over English soil. Good night, time traveler. May your dreams carry echoes of the voices we borrowed today, and may tomorrow find you rested in the gentle footprints we left on the infinite sand of history.